Well, we are on the lifestyle section today, and on lifestyle today we are talking about a subject that has been in the headlines for the last few weeks especially, and this is talking about men who are battered by their spouses or their wives. Let me just let you know at this point in time, if you are in a situation or has had experience, whether a friend or yourself being battered as a man or as a lady, maybe you have battered or even been tempted to batter your husband, we're looking at more the reasons why this is on the increase, if at all it is on the increase, and we'd love to hear from you. The phone lines will be open later on, but also you can tweet and let us know what your comments and your take is on this, and that's at Michael G. Gitonga or at Sophia Wanuna or at KTN Kenya. And joining me in the studio is on my extreme left, Ken Ouko, who's a sociologist. And we also have Chris Hart, who's a relationship expert. And gentlemen, thank you for joining me once again on this very, very interesting subject, which has not been talked about in the olden days, but seems to be coming up to the top and the surface more in recent times. Now, according to a survey that was conducted a while ago, there's been an increase from about 300,000 cases of husband battering to a whooping 460,000. This was a survey that was done last year, but that is a significant increase. Now, maybe just to get the debate going, is this really an increase, or is it that possibly, and I'll start with you, Ken, that the reports are coming out more and men are speaking about it more as opposed to in the olden days where they would be quiet and mum about it?
Well, both of those may work, but I think women are becoming more violent, if you ask me. I actually have a problem with the title of this thing, because
husband battery. Yes,
when it comes to husbands, we talk about battery, which sounds really gross.
What would you have the title as?
Just like wife beating, we can call it husband beating.
Okay.
Yeah, but I guess it's a traditional linguistic thing to do that, because it was previously unheard of, for a man to be stepped on, so to speak, by a woman. But I think both factors come into play. The fact that men are becoming more open about it, society is more receptive towards such cases, and the women are basically, upping their game, so to speak. They don't take any more nonsense from men like they used to. Traditionally, even if you had a useless man, you had to live by his rules and that kind of thing. Not anymore. Women have changed that equation.
Okay. Chris, do you think that this is an increase generally because of the society that we are in, as a change of societal behavior, or is it that there are more cases reported and men are becoming more open about it?
I think men are more open about it. I think they're more willing to say something. I think actually men are getting angry about the, can I be honest, the bias towards reporting the women. So men are actually reporting it because they say, why shouldn't I speak out? But if you look at the way society views the whole subject, it's quite clear that men have got an uphill struggle. It is unbelievably difficult for a man to report that he is being battered. I mean, just imagine, he goes to the police station and he starts to tell the story. I mean, they'll laugh, and he knows they'll laugh. He knows that his friends will laugh. Everybody knows that. I don't think there is a significant increase in numbers. I think there is a hidden, huge number of men who are being beaten up by their wives, and they don't say a word. What we're seeing is an increase in the number of people who are willing to talk about it. There are some very good studies that have been made over many years about the total number of men and women who abuse one another, and the numbers are 50-50. The number of women who batter their husbands is exactly the same as the number of men who batter their wives.
You think the number is the same?
Yeah, it is the same. There's no question about it.
Okay.
There is a difference in the number of people who are seriously injured. The number who actually end up in hospital really in trouble, the women outnumber the men, and that's because men are bigger, and that's the only reason. But if you look at the more, shall we say, the more normal situation where people are just fighting, shouting, throwing things at one another, it's 50-50.
Okay. Ken, do you agree that there's actually an equal number of women that even over time have beaten their husbands? You said we don't use the word battered, but beaten their husbands, and maybe it's just the fact that men are physically bigger, that we you know, have that disparity?
Yeah, you know, the male physique, the masculine intent kind of creates that difficulty that men have, you know, in trying to cope with that kind of thing. And part of the problem we have, therefore, is that when that happens to a man, first he has to live with it by himself, you know, really try to absorb the shocker. But, you know, many times for women, it's actually a build-up. You know, men tend to explode. Whenever there's a problem, they'll explode on their wives, you know, and sometimes that problem is external. It might not even be right inside his house. But for the woman, this builds up. You know, it starts actually from the better word now for emotional battery.
Right.
A woman will mistreat the husband, you know, to high heaven in the house. And of course, you probably complain about it and people are like, take charge, you know, do this, you're the man. But the woman is an emotional terrorist. So already you're weather beaten in the house. And then now finally sometimes it gets physical. And now that's where the problem is, because eventually then that woman then translates her anger and her emotional, you know, pressure on you into a physical thing, and she could hit you with a sophoria or do something, pour hot water on you, and you have all these things that happen to men. But then when they go to the hospital or when they go to the police station, they report a different story. They say, oh, you know, we were just doing this and then water spilled on me. But she actually did it on purpose. So what Chris is saying makes a lot of sense, that you carry that stigma with you as a man. It's on your shoulder that this has happened to me, but how am I going to report it? Yeah, you want it to come out there, but you can't just go and say, I was sitting down and then she did this. Because people will ask, why were you sitting down? Why didn't you react? You know,
yes,
that kind
why
of
didn't
thing.
you throw a fist or something?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, just in case you're joining us now, the conversation that we're having today is on husbands who are beaten by their wives. And Ken has mentioned that we should change it from battering. I think battering somehow sounds like it's, I don't know, but we're talking about husbands who are being beaten by their wives. And that's the conversation we're having today, and would love to hear from you what your take is on that. Is it on the increase? Is it something that we should be concerned about? And according to Chris Hart, he says that ideally it is not on the increase, but it's just that men are, you know, more forthcoming and saying that this is happening more as we go along. But would like to have this conversation with you. Tafadhali, do let us know what your thoughts are, and you can do that on Twitter, and that's at Michael G. Gitonga or at Sophia Wanuna, and would be great to hear from you. And also, this has, according to some statistics that we have, there's been an increase from 300,000 husbands who have been, you know, beaten. Welcome, sir. Good to have you on the set. And to a whooping 460,000. These are statistics that are coming forth. But the question, of course, remains, is it that they have increased, or is it the fact that people are reporting this more? And now, joining me on the set is Dr. Jay Weche. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And Dr. Jay Weche is one who has actually gone through abuse as a husband. And maybe just so that we understand and know where you're coming from, Dr. Jay Weche, what sort of abuse are we talking about here?
We're talking about emotional abuse, not physical. Emotional
Not physical.
abuse. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And what sort of abuse is this?
Well, it's the kind of abuse that the panelist here was talking about, where you basically are terrorized, but the person who does that does it so well that nobody else can really tell what is going on. So you are basically held hostage, and you have to keep up to certain rules and guidelines that are given. And when you fail to do so, because this is happening in the private confines of your own house or bedroom, nobody else is going to be able to come in and arbitrate.
Okay. And this is something that you have experienced. How long was it going on for?
This went on for about 2.5 years. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And for many men, of course, it would be very difficult for them to come out. Naturally, men don't talk much about their issues.
Yes.
And especially when there are issues to do with abuse and emotion. What gave you the courage to actually come out and say, look, I can actually talk about this?
What gave me the courage is listening to people like Mr. Chris Hart here. He doesn't know that he's our savior in many, many ways. And basically accepting to go for counseling, where counselors encourage you to talk about what is on your heart, talk about the things that are heavy on you. But the breaking point for me was that my physical health was actually falling apart. I was now on serious medications, and it was just not sustainable for me to continue on like that.
Okay. All right. Coming to you, Ken. when we see men come out more in the open to talk about emotional issues, what has brought about that change? Because that was something that even in bars and when men would sit down together in their kamkunjis, that's not a subject that they would talk about. If anything, they would talk about how they are the abuser.
Like I always say, I think society is a bit more liberal now, and we are able to come out and do these things, and you don't carry so much weight of regret and embarrassment on your shoulder. I think the male species has become a little more enlightened to the fact that we need to do something about our circumstance. Yeah, you remember Chris was talking about people getting angry and saying everybody's talking about the girl, everybody's talking about the woman, but what about the boy, what about the man? Yeah, it gets to a point where you carry this burden on your shoulder and you're thinking, no, I need to do this so that maybe other men can do the same. And I'm glad he talked about that, because just before he walked in, you remember I was talking about emotional terrorism. And for the man, that sometimes is a more severe form of abuse than the physical, because this woman will call you all sorts of names and, you know, do all sorts of things against you or about you that you cannot even dare to share with anyone, because if you do, people will say, why didn't you just, you know, punch her in the face? Yeah, so a lot of times I think what has happened in modern society is that we are able to now transgress that traditional and customary boundary and be able to talk about these things openly. Yeah, and when you meet up with counselors and therapists, then you open up and tell them, and then they also document your story and other people see it. And you know, when we do it on TV, same story. There are people somewhere who are probably going through this, and then when they see it, they say, oh, okay, so it's actually fine to talk about it. So there's been a lot of expansion of space that's making men able to, you know, document and talk about their case.
All right, Chris, talking about expansion of space and where we are today, there's been a lot of push for women empowerment. There's been all sorts of organizations that have come up, and more specifically empowering the girl child. Whereas we've not had so much of empowering the boy child, or where's the boy child supposed to go? Do you think this has had an effect on where we are today in terms of now the women coming out to abuse, whether physically or emotionally, more than they did before?
I think actually it hasn't changed the core numbers. I think women have always been abusive. I think men have always been abusive. I think what my colleagues have been saying is absolutely true. The women are particularly skilled at emotional abuse. A woman's ability to psychologically get to the point where a man feels really small is a miracle. They're brilliant at it.
Which might even be a bigger abuse than the
actual it can be devastating because it's hidden and there are no scars. There's nothing to prove it. But you're dead right. There have been countless organizations set up for the girl child. I don't know where we got that awful expression from, but and the boys have been neglected. If you look, for example, in education, the education system, I'll grant you, was biased towards boys 50 odd years ago. Now it's hugely biased towards girls, and you see boys seriously struggling in education and seriously struggling to make the transition into adult life. Society has got to adjust to make it more equitable, and clearly it's never worse than in the area of abuse. It's assumed that men are abusers. A man who goes to a police station is likely to be arrested rather than sympathized with, because the assumption will be that in some way it's all his fault.
It's all his fault.
There was a fascinating film made one time. Imagine two actors, man and a woman, go on the street and they pretend to have a row. They first do it with the man abusing the woman. The bystanders all took part. They all got involved. They all protected the woman. Then they reversed it, and the woman's abusing the man. They all laughed. They all pointing. Oh, that's so funny, you know? That's the core problem.
All right. Okay, and well, the debate that we're having this morning is on husband and spouse, male spouse, shall I say, being battered and abused. And today we're also playing musical chairs. So also joining us now is Nderito Njoka, who is the chairman for Maendeleo ya Wanaume. And thank you for joining us today. Now, Nderito, the statistics that we have here show that there's been an increase, although Chris is of the opinion that there's actually been no increase in men being beaten by their wives and their female spouses. He says that this has been there all along. What would your comments on that be? Has there been an increase?
Of course, as the chair of the Maendeleo ya Wanaume organization, and according to a research that we have done, that is the research that we did in the year 2013, it was clear that over 2.1 million men are going through violence, gender violence, all sorts of violence. It may be emotional, battery, and legal, socio-economic. And I'm saying this because we have done the research. And this year we are doing another comprehensive research in all counties. And it is now clear that husband battery is on the increase. It's actually on the upsurge. And the government and also social organizations need to come along and really know the way forward, because when the man is at a siege, then automatically the society, the families, everything has gone hayway. Yeah.
All right. Let me come to you, Reverend J. Weche. Because as one who has come out to say that you've been abused emotionally, and what we'd like to concentrate on so much is the why. Do you have the reasons as to why you were emotionally abused?
I have tried to explain the reasons why I was emotionally abused, and I've tried to help people understand the context in which this happened. The context, first of all, is because a lot of fathers are failing in their roles of loving their wives unconditionally.
Were you failing as a father?
Not yet. No, this is in the background, first of all, where fathers fail to love their wives. Therefore, daughters in that home do not see their mothers being loved, and they grow up knowing that they need to be able to defend themselves against men. Then when these daughters now get into relationships, like now in the situation I was in, somebody like that is at a constant war footing, because the way they have been brought up is that all men are dogs, all men are out to injure you, and therefore they must protect themselves left, right, and center. And as Dr. Chris Hart has said, they are going to use the arsenal that is available to them, which is the emotional one. And with that arsenal, they'll fire their missiles at you, they'll be blowing you up before you even know what's happening. So that is a situation where people are literally dysfunctional, and they need to actually go into counseling and you know, that kind of support, in order for them to, first of all, acknowledge what is going on, and then be in a position now to revert it. But because many of us fall in love and we're excited about the emotions of love, and we think that love, in quotes, conquers all, we forget that there are a lot of skeletons in the closet. It is now when you're in that intimate, close environment with one another that the closet doors open and those skeletons fall on you.
Okay. Nderitu Njoka, I know you've handled very many cases of different men who've come to you for different reasons.
Yep.
What would you say generally are the reasons that they have been abused?
One, of course, there is the issue of alcohol and drug abuse. That is one. Two, there is the issue of the society not believing, or rather accepting, there is a long perception that men don't go through violence. So culturally, they just go through gender violence silently, just to protect their ego. This is something that also is supposed to be taught to the young people, that men are also human beings like women, and they need to admit when they go through a problem, whether it's violence perpetrated by the woman. We are not saying, rather, that only men go through violence. Of course, women also are going through the same gender violence that is in our families, domestic violence. But now that men are going through the same, there is an increase. Now, people tend not to believe. People tend to say that these men are weak. Not that all men are drunkards. Of course, there are some men who are really playing their role in the families. They are really very responsible. They are even pastors. They are men, good men in the society. But they are going through violence simply because some of these women want to control the family. They want to henpeck the men, not because some of these men are not.
So would you look at it as an issue of them wanting to take control? Is it a power struggle, or is it an issue of the men having not taken care of their responsibility, and women are forced to now become the defender and they defend themselves?
Of course, there is what we call lack of religious background, because people have moved away from their religion. The religion is very clear, whether it's Quran, the Bible, it is very clear, the laws of men and women. But today, women want to take control over the families, they want to take control of everything, and this is where the confusion is coming in. Women need to go back to their cultural, their religious backgrounds,
and what is that
we should not fight in any way, because in the creation, you remember in the creation, the role of women are very defined. In creation, the role of men are clearly defined. Of course, the role of man, one of the roles of man is to protect the women, of course, to love the women. And the role of also women is to love, is to love and respect the men. But they're not doing this. So there is a big problem. There is a power struggle in the family. And what now is, there is a confusion from the family level. I think the best thing is people to go back to their religion, to be educated, so that we may not be like we are pulling each other. We are struggling. Yeah.
All right. Ken, do you feel that it's a mix of roles here that has brought about to where we are today? According to Njoka, he says that women need to go back to their role, which I'll come back to you to tell me what that role is. But do you feel that roles have been so mixed up now to a point where women have had to come out and defend themselves?
If I may apply a bit of sociology, there's something called role conflict, where you define your role and then somebody else defines their role, and then they define yours for you, and then you also define theirs for them, and then you create a place where you're not agreeing on what is supposed to be done. So the concept of provider is a very huge umbrella for men, because a woman will assume that you're a provider regardless of your economic status, and if therefore you fall short, you're already being seen as half man, quote unquote. But I was going to take you back to culture and tradition. Again, a sociological concept of stereotyping, where you assume from the time you're growing up, you're socialized to believe that about this kind of people, they're like this. In fact, on Monday in the Standard, there was an article about Kikuyu women and if they're marriageable, you know, because they're very difficult. I think it was somewhere in the middle pages. I don't know if you saw it. And if you read that article, it's what Kenyans think of Kikuyu women, that they're violent. You know,
stereotype.
Yes, it's a stereotype. And that stereotype then becomes ingrained in your psyche as a woman. So you meet a very modern Kikuyu woman who's gone to the university, but she thinks, since I come from Nyeri, I'm supposed to show you that I come from there. You know, so then they internalize that concept. And it's the same thing if you hear women saying, oh, Kisii men are very violent, Meru men are very violent. It's a stereotype, but these things are internalized. And once you do that, then people look at you, wakika chonjo, if you know what I mean. They're expecting that anytime you will explode. So it's also something that we build up as we socialize. And the modern woman, I think that's what Njoka is trying to say, the modern woman is trying to bite a bigger chunk of the apple. Yeah, and saying that fine, for all these years since the story of creation, our role has always been subservient to you, but not anymore, because we are doing this career-wise, we are doing this intellectually. In fact, at the universities, I think part of what you were saying, if you look at the enrollment, yeah, the girls are now outnumbering the boys, and nobody is talking about it. But before, it was a big issue. Where are the girls? Why are they not coming to school? Nobody is talking about the boys anymore. You go into a class of 200, and 115 are girls, 85 are boys. Yeah, so that's a problem that has permeated society all the way to marriage.
All right, Chris, do you feel that given that the girl child has had such a big push, it's time now to maybe also turn our attention to the boy child? Although I know you don't like that term, girl child and boy child, you've made it very clear. Do you think we need to concentrate more on the role for the boy as well? Has it been left out?
Yes, I think so. You know, if you go back into the 70s, the era of feminism, you know, it was almost accepted that the male had no role. In a family, there was no need for a man. A woman could bring up a family all by herself. Now, that resulted in a whole generation of young men growing up without male role models. And suddenly, when they became men, they didn't actually know how to behave. Now, that's proved to us that you actually do have to focus on the boys. You have to give them male role models. You have to give them an experience in school, for example, which is different to girls. Girls are very cooperative in school. They're very comfortable with assignments and things like that. Boys, to be honest, are mischievous. They like to run around a lot. They need a different style of discipline. If you give them female discipline, especially if you've got an excess of women on the teaching staff, suddenly they are pathologized. These boys all have ADHD. Put them on Ritalin. You see the problem we've entered. So yes, we do need to swing the pendulum again and look to see what it is about the way we are bringing up boys and ask whether we're doing a good job. And the answer is currently, no, we're not. We're not doing a good job for boys at all.
Okay, Reverend Weche, I know part of the solution, if there is one, if we're to find one, is talking about it, and men also coming out to say what really the problem has been. And especially given that you're Reverend, I don't know if you are Reverend before the abuse, after. That's a position of authority. How did you gather and master the courage to come out and talk about abuse, especially given that in your own right you're a leader, not just a man, but a leader, a man leader?
Well, in my case, I chose to submit myself to counselors, like the good doctor over here. Counselors who would not just say like the normal people, just let's pray about it and let it end there. There are professional counselors, even within the church, who are going to be able to give psychological support within the context of what the scriptures say. So they're not going to ask you to do things like yoga and other things that are outside of the Christian realm, so to speak. But I was able to literally be taken through counseling. There was first of all personal counseling, and then after that there was, as and when I now found somebody else who was ready and willing to accept my advances, I was able to now go for counseling with that particular person. So it's important then to literally talk about this, and one of the things that I was advised to do was to literally write a book. So my journal that I had been keeping in order for me not to explode now became the material that I was now able to use and put together, and the book is called Conflict and Deception in Relationships and Marriage. It's available over the internet.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to the phone lines, and we have Gladys in Kahawa West. Thank you for calling, Gladys. Your comment or question?
Yeah. Good morning.
Morning.
Yes, I'm watching the conversation, and I want to contribute in the side of men, because you know,
yes,
according to women, women are. All women are created to influence men. And the problem is that they can influence positively or negative.
Okay.
And on the negative side, it is when they are battering emotionally or physically. But also men should be advocated men should be advocated to stand on the right. They shouldn't come on the side of a woman instead of submission. A woman should not be the one that is saying. A woman is supposed to submit. So when a woman comes on the side of the man, that is what he is punishment battering, because he has come to the side of authority, and man has allowed that. So a man should be taught how to stand in their authority. And then it should not come to the other side of submission, because mtu anachoka kwa sababu anasubmit.
Okay.
So I think that the leader of maendeleo ya wanaume should continue having that Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, Gladys, for your call. And if you have a call that you, or rather if you have comments, you're free to give us a call, and we'd be happy to hear from you. Now, Nderitu Njoka, Gladys brings in an interesting point, maybe for supporting what you're saying in terms of roles. Are men being beaten because they're submitting to their wives?
Of course, like I said earlier, there's what we call confusion of laws. And
what do you think is the role for a woman?
Of course, it's just one. One role for the woman is to be submissive to the men.
What does
of course,
mean?
to be submissive to a man who is a positive man, not a man who is also loving the woman.
What does submission constitute? Because sometimes I think we may misunderstand that term.
Of course, when a woman submits to a man and this man loves the woman, there is what we call love. That is according to God's perception. That love will only come in a family when the woman is submissive and when the man loves the woman. Then they will never have any conflict in that family. But today we have women, because some of these women think that they have now, they are learned, you know, they are modern women. They think it's now no more being submissive to men. We can even do it alone. Even today there is that evil gospel that we can do it alone. No need even to have a man as a husband. We can have a child, we can live in our own family without a man in the house, which is a very, very wrong gospel, even to our young girls. What we are trying to do as Maendeleo and Home Organization is to bring together families, trying to tell families that we cannot do without the other partner. Women need to know that. Men also need to know that. We need to even be role models, good role models to our children, because what now we are portraying to our children is confusion of laws, and tomorrow expect a disaster. Because we actually, last year, when we were marking Men's Liberation Day, we declared that gender-based violence is a global disaster, because we cannot go anywhere where there is violence from the family level. The countries, nations will not go on, will not be peaceful, if there is violence in the family. And we wrote a letter to the UN trying to tell them that now, declare gender violence as a global disaster. Let us have policies, to save our families, to save our men and women.
All right. Chris, do you agree with Nderito here, and maybe Gladys, that there is that confusion of roles, and it's possible that the men are being abused more because they have submitted?
I think there is a confusion of roles. I mean, for the first time in human history, you have a situation where both the men and the women are educated and working outside the home, and people are trying to renegotiate the roles within marriage. And of course, you make a few wrong turns when you're negotiating. Traditionally, it was always very clear, the man went herding the cattle and the woman stayed at home and did what she did in kitchens and the garden. Now that's not at all clear. And how it will pan out, I really don't know, but there is a renegotiation going on. But I don't think that has actually increased the amount of violence. If you look right over recorded history, there has always been a lot of violence. There has always been a lot of violence in society, and a lot of it has been within families. I think, if anything, violence has reduced over the last 50 or 100 years, but we have talked about it a lot more. There would have been an awful lot of angry fights in houses that never met the light of day. Now, people are much more willing to talk. Mm-hmm. It is still very difficult to talk. Let's be clear about that, especially for men. It is enormously difficult for a man to tell his friends, to tell the authorities, to find a supportive organization. About the only people who will listen to a man are counselors, because just about everybody else has got the stereotype that men are not beaten up. And it's very important to realize just how high the statistics are of the number of women who are abusive. I mean, for example, 3 times as many women as men in the house will attack with a weapon. A man is much more likely to use his bare hands. A woman is far more likely to have a knife in her hand or some other object.
Okay.
Now, the numbers can't get any higher.
Okay. I want to move to a call here from Tom in Kisumu. Tom, thank you for calling. Your comment or question?
Yeah. As for me, what I can contribute over the issue is that for the first time that the married couple, or men and women, are actually coming into conflict. That is, we don't have that mutual understanding.
Okay.
In the first case. Yeah, and then another thing that contributes to this is the trust between the two. You do find that a man or a woman does not actually trust his or her partner. So this one actually, yeah,
go on.
Yeah, so this is actually, it brings a lot of violence, because we have the two are actually battling for who to take the lead of the house. Yeah. So you find a woman wants to take the lead.
Okay.
And then another thing is that the responsibility is not well spread for the family. Then it brings the conflict in the house.
All right. Thank you very much, Tom. We'll also take another call from Pamela in Rongai. Thank you for calling, Pamela.
Yes.
Yes, go right ahead. Yes, Pamela, go ahead with your question or comment.
Yeah, my question is, based on my life, I got a man who cheated that he has separated from his wife. And then I was such a girl that I had known no man. After you have stayed with this man, you find out that he has gone back to his wife.
Okay.
Then you want to separate from this man, and he continues telling you that he loves you, which is not true according to me. Because if he loved me, he could not go back to his wife. Now, mwanaume kama huyu ni wa kupigwa toke.
So as far as you're concerned, huyu ni wa kuchapwa aende.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm just asking, how do you treat such a man?
Okay. Thank you very much, Pamela, for your sentiments and your question there. Ken, let's start with Pamela's question. Mwanaume kama huyu anafanywa nini? Si anachapwa tu.
No. You have to come to an understanding. This is modern society, and you know, and I always say that if a woman can fall for that in this age and time, then she's also got something wrong with her. Because if a guy is married and he's lying to you that he's separated, the signs are always there. You can tell, unless you're also just being in love, quote unquote, and you don't want to see it. It's very easy to know if he is really separated or not. Very easy. But if you think about it, if you look at that equation that Njoka was bringing about in terms of submission, you know, defining these roles, you could decide, for example, I think we were talking about this last week, you submit yourself to a second woman as a second wife and be happy in that relationship instead of, you know, causing chaos and saying, oh no, you said you've left this other one, so we have to do this together. If you go back to the book of Ephesians chapter 5, the submission thing is not subordination. No. When you tell a woman to be submissive, it's in the sense that she then has to live by the rules of the man. And that's universal. It's very, apart from Sri Lanka maybe, matriarchal societies where the woman is the one who marries the man.
There's the dowry, you know.
Yeah. So then it's a bit different. But everywhere else in the world you go, that idea of being submissive is to, in the sense that you then have to live by the rules of the man. That is where the problem is in modern society. The women are feeling they don't have to. And then now you start having this conflict and they're saying, no, you live your life, I live mine, but you've married her, she's your wife. You know, then you start having this tug of war. And some of them get physical, therefore. Yeah.
All right, Reverend Weche may be moving on, but before we go that to Tom in Kisumu was saying that there is an issue of trust and mutual understanding.
Yes.
Would you say this was the case in your situation?
No,
Was there an issue of mistrust?
In my situation, there was mistrust that came even before the relationship. Mistrust that came basically from...
based on the background?
Based on the background, yes. Not having been in an environment where you can learn to love and accept and trust people, and therefore bringing that kind of baggage into now the new relationship. And that kind of baggage, unfortunately, becomes a situation which, again, Dr. Chris Hart has spoken about, where it's like you're fighting with ghosts. You know, I'm trying to deal with you, but as I'm dealing with you, you've got so many other unknown influences that are speaking to you and prompting you to do A, B, C, D, from your fears, from your, you know, so many other things. So once the trust goes in that kind of a situation, building it is extremely difficult.
Like Michael asked earlier, were you were already a reverend then?
No, at that particular time I was not a reverend,
okay.
but I had already done work with the church.
Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
And maybe just as we get close to winding up, has that been resolved? Has the emotional abuse stopped? Are you still together?
That particular one totally fell apart, unfortunately, because as I was sharing with some of your newspaper people upstairs, we were operating in different countries, initially from Kenya, then to Botswana, then to the United States. And then in the United States, there are totally different laws. And those laws are such that if a woman just says "mwe," you're going to be locked up.
Of course.
So those of us who are not willing to be subjected to those kind of rules called it a day and said, you know, remain with the house, the car, whatnot. I am going back to Africa where men can be men. So that's how the situation ended.
All right, as we wind up, Nderito Njoka, do you think in Africa men are men, and is the fact that they're being abused reducing their manhood?
Of course, Africa is far much ahead when it comes to gender relations. Not like the Western society where there's a lot of, I mean, all men are really battered and really go through gender violence silently. What we are lacking and what we have even proposed to the Ministry of Education is to introduce gender studies from primary level, whereby boys and girls will be taught on their relations, on gender relations, because this is what is lacking. Girls really don't know how to behave. They don't know what to do when it comes to relations. That is what we are lacking. And we have also proposed even to the UN to come along with policies that also support the men. We don't just need to have UN women. We also need to have UN men or women, so that we have policies and guidelines whereby all genders will actually feel comfortable. Not like now it's only the women who are going through problems and men are enjoying. No. We are all in one society, and we need to be handled like we are actually in one society. Not like women are in a different society and men are in a different. No. We need to be brought together as a family.
All right.
Yeah.
Chris, maybe very briefly, is this likely to change given that society has actually changed? We're no longer the hunter who goes out looking for the animal and brings it home. The women are equally participating in bringing bread home. Is this likely to change, or should we just accept that that's the way it is?
I don't think we're going to go back. I think there has been a complete change in society driven by education of women, and I don't think the rules will go back to 200 or 300 years ago. No question about that. We have moved from a primarily agrarian-based society where people were very static to one in which there is constant, huge change. And I think we're going to go through a period of great instability in terms of how marriages work, until gradually a new form emerges. I don't know what shape it's going to be, but it will be a lot more equal, a lot more understanding of each other's roles.
Right.
And if I could just echo something he said,
Very
I
briefly.
do think there is a need for schools to be educating people in terms of roles and shall we call them relationship skills. We just simply don't provide that for children currently.
All right. We're going to have to wind it up right there, gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming into the studio. Again, I noticed that it is gentlemen. So, Deritu Njoka, chairman for Maendeleo ya Wanaume, Ken Ouko, who's a sociologist, Chris Hart, relationship expert, and Reverend Jay Weche, who was also sharing his story. Thank you very much for participating. And